Good day everyone, and welcome back to another exciting journey through the annals of linguistic history. Today we're embarking on an extraordinary expedition to unravel the mysteries of Proto-Indo-European and its captivating offspring, the vast and diverse family of Indo-European languages. From the romantic tones of French to the ls and ons of Polish and the flow of Sanskrit to the grammar of German and the conservatism of Lithuanian, these languages have shaped cultures, conquered continents, and connected millions of people across the globe. But what exactly is Proto-Indo-European, the ancient ancestor from which these languages sprung? And how did it evolve over millennia to give birth to some of the world's most spoken tongues? And what can it reveal about our shared human history? I'm your guide on this linguistic odyssey. My name is Hittite, and together we'll journey deep into the heart of Proto-Indo-European. We'll explore its branches, its grammar, its vocabulary, and trace its influence on the modern world. So whether you're a language lover, a history buff, or simply curious about the roots of communication, you're in for an adventure today. But you may be asking yourselves, what exactly is Proto-Indo-European? Well, Proto-Indo-European, often abbreviated as PIE, is the reconstructed common ancestor of the Indo-European language family. This language family includes the languages that I've just mentioned, but also many more, such as Irish, Welsh, Danish, Polish, Farsi, Hindi, Czech, Tocharian, Hittite, Bulgarian, and many more, and even countless languages lost to time. It's a hypothetical, ancient language that is believed to have been spoken thousands of years ago, around 4,500 years BCE, on the Pontic-Caspian steppe. So how do we know that Proto-Indo-European really existed? Well, obviously the speakers on the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 4,500 BCE must have spoken some form of language, but in terms of PIE, it can actually be reconstructed with some degree of accuracy by what is known as the comparative method. That is, by comparing words, sounds and grammar across the Indo-European daughter languages, and also via identifying sound laws. In fact, we've actually had situations in the history of Proto-Indo-European studies where these methods linguists have applied have ended up speculating that there may have been a sound present in Proto-Indo-European that isn't actually observable in any of its offspring languages. So it's kind of like a theoretical sound. Linguists came up with this due to irregular patterns of sound changes observed in some verb and noun forms. For a long time, this sound, however, was hypothetical, until Hittite was translated, that is. Hittite is an Anatolian Indo-European language, and it was shown to have exactly these sounds that linguists predicted would exist. So this, for many people, justified Proto-Indo-European studies as a worthwhile endeavour. So very often when we are studying Proto-Indo-European, we will come across a tree model that looks something similar to this. Maybe there's more branches, maybe there's more sub-branches, but this is usually the model which is used to represent how Proto-Indo-European diffused into its offspring languages. This particular model was put together by Ringer, Warner and Taylor in 2002, so it's a little bit dated now, but in my opinion, it's actually still the best model that we have. So let's break this model down. What do we have? Well, here we have Proto-Indo-European, again, probably spoken about 4,500 years BCE. And then we have various sub-branches, and these broke off in temporal order. So Anatolian was the first dialect to break off into an offspring language, and from the Anatolian branch, we actually have some sub-branches. For example, the famous Hittite and Luvian. Tocharian is an extinct branch alongside Anatolian. There were two varieties of Tocharian, A and B. Greek and Armenian broke off on their own branch next, with Armenian becoming a sub-branch. Italo-Celtic broke off. The Celtic languages gave us a number of Indo-European offspring languages. Today, for example, survives Irish and Welsh, amongst others. And the Italo branch diffused into the modern Romance languages, including French, Spanish, Romanian, and many more. So what I'm drawing here is by no means conclusive. Next was Germanic. This gave us English, Gothic, all the Scandinavian languages. So it was Danish. Balto-Slavic. Slavic split off into, for example, Russian, Polish, many more. The Balto element became Lithuanian, Latvian, and Indo-Iranian. Indo became, for example, Sanskrit, and Iranian became modern-day Farsi. Now, there's many more languages that we could put onto this branching tree diagram. This is just to give you a flavour of where certain popular languages lie on the Indo-European language tree. Now, you may be asking yourselves, well, how do we get all of these offspring or daughter languages from Proto-Indo-European? Surely the language would just evolve together and today everybody would just be speaking one language. Well, let's draw on this map the step where the Proto-Indo-European heartland is. So inside this blue outline is an approximation of where the steppe area was. And let's imagine the following situation. Let's imagine that we have this dude here that lives on this side of the steppe, and we have this dudette living on this side of the steppe. Now, obviously, they are separated. At the moment, they speak the same language, but they're separated by geography. And you've got to remember that 4,500 years BCE, technology obviously wasn't what we have today in terms of modern communication technologies and transportation technologies and things like this. So the ability of a person speaking Proto-Indo-European here and a person speaking Proto-Indo-European here, for them to ever encounter each other and communicate with each other was probably unlikely. Yet this distance between them, between these two geographical edges where the Proto-Indo-European dialect continuum was spoken, they would have been able to understand each other and there would be variation inside this zone. This variation comes from probably at first idiosyncratic changes to language. One person or a small group of people make some small changes to grammar or vocabulary. These changes persist and they're passed on between people and generations. They establish themselves as becoming the standard form of language in that particular area. And the same process happens over here. So gradually, Proto-Indo-European is diffusing itself into many smaller dialect zones. There might be a dialect up here, for example, a dialect down here, a dialect here, or here. These are just examples. We don't know what it looked like for sure, but it would be something similar to this. Now, as people moved around, and so as the geographical distance changed and as the temporal distance changed, because we would pass down these changes through generations, these small changes in language which occurred would evolve into more dramatic changes in language. And at some point, this group of people over here and this group of people over here would cease to be able to understand each other. At that point, we can say that we have an offspring language created. So just for example, and I'm not suggesting this is where these speakers were located or how this migration pattern happened, but here we might have had the Proto-Tocharian speakers, and over here we could have had the Proto-Italo-Celtic speakers. At some point in time, if we go back in time, they would have been able to understand each other. Their dialect would have sounded different, but still understandable. However, their language has evolved and changed to the point where it doesn't become understandable between these two groups. That's how Proto-Indo-European diffused into all of these daughter languages. As different groups of people separated themselves into dialect zones, and then these dialect zones moved through migration. Some people went down here, some people went over here. These languages became more distinct with more geographical and temporal distance between them, and the branches of Indo-European appear. So what were some of the features of Proto-Indo-European in terms of phonology and grammar? Well, to begin with, Proto-Indo-European likely had 2 vowels, e and o, plus 25 consonants, including 3 laryngeals. Nouns were declined into 8 or 9 cases, which means that the ending of a noun changed depending on its grammatical function in a sentence. If you're unsure about case systems, please check out my first lesson in my Learn Hittite series where we go over this and I give some examples. Word order was likely subject, object, verb, although other word orders were possible. And the adjective came before the noun, although again variation was possible. Proto-Indo-European had 3 genders, masculine, feminine and neuter, and finally there were a variety of verb forms depending on grammatical aspect and mood. And here we have some vocabulary terms in Proto-Indo-European compared to the offspring languages. In English we have I, you, mother, father, one, two and drink. So 2 pronouns, 2 nouns, 2 numerals and 1 verb. These terms I took from common Swadesh lists that you can find online and in academic books. Swadesh lists are lists of about 200 words which are considered to be stable in terms of their evolution and are therefore useful in comparison between languages and language groups. Here we have the Proto-Indo-European to begin with. Just one quick note on pronunciation of Proto-Indo-European. Nobody knows for sure how Proto-Indo-European was exactly pronounced. In fact, there are some sounds which are heavily debated in terms of what the pronunciation quality was like. However, it doesn't mean that we can't have a go at pronouncing it. And what I would say is I speak 2 languages, 2 foreign languages reasonably well, and my pronunciation is terrible in both of them. I'd argue my pronunciation is terrible in my native language as well. But it doesn't stop me from being understood, especially if the person that I'm speaking to wants to understand me and wants to be understood themselves. So I would say that if you learned these pronunciation forms and you were magically transported back in time to the Pontic-Caspian steppe and you needed to speak some Proto-Indo-European, you would be understood. So in English we have I, in Proto-Indo-European ech. English we have singular you, Proto-Indo-European tuch, or te. We have 2 forms here because there are different reconstructions from different academics. In fact, there are different reconstructions for all of these terms. I've just provided the most common, most reliable, in my opinion. Mother, mekter. Father, atta, or preter. One, oinos, or sem. 2, dwo, and to drink, per. Now, as we compare these terms with the offspring languages, we can see a high degree of similarity between the individual offspring languages and the proto-language itself. For example, you singular is very stable between all of the offspring languages. So is 2, with perhaps zik being the exception with singular u, and we being the exception for Tocharian B. So we can see many similarities here, but also we can see some differences. And it's these differences which are key, because it's really these differences which indicate the evolution of a dialect into a fully fledged language. And these small differences will stack up, will collate, and at that point we begin to get offspring languages being born from dialects. And again, in terms of Proto-Indo-European pronunciation, we would have had different dialect groups, and so these forms would have had different pronunciations depending on the individual dialect of Proto-Indo-European being spoken. So let's have a look at Hittite. It's perhaps a language that I know best. In Hittite, we have I as uk, you singular zik, mother annas, father attas, one sia. This asterisk here indicates that it is a reconstructed form. It's not attested anywhere, but we can consider this academia's best guess of what one would have been. We have doubts about the reconstructed form of one in Hittite because often numbers obviously were displayed with a numeral and not written out in terms of syllables. To dan and to drink ekku. Hittite is of course famous because it preserves the 3 laryngeal sounds that we find in Proto-Indo-European, or we believe we can find in Proto-Indo-European. Tocharian B is listed here. There is also a Tocharian A. They are not mutually intelligible, so a speaker of Tocharian B would find it a little bit difficult or very difficult to understand a speaker of Tocharian A, but we have Tocharian B here. Tocharian is actually interesting because it has a well-developed case system like Proto-Indo-European, but actually the cases function very differently to how they do in Proto-Indo-European. So a lot of change there happened in terms of the case system. Proto-Celtic, interesting because many of the reconstructed terms are comparable to the Proto-Indo-European reconstructions, and actually we're able to reconstruct many Proto-Celtic terms, and from the Proto-Celtic terms get to the Proto-Indo-European reconstruction. It's not so obvious in some of the other languages, like, for example, Proto-Hellenic, Proto-Balto-Slavic, Proto-Indo-Iranian, Proto-Italic, Proto-Germanic. Proto-Germanic was interesting because its subgroups seem to show little diversity. Many of the subgroup dialects of Proto-Germanic had very similar reconstructed forms. And of course, missing here is Armenian and Phrygian. Phrygian mainly because it is a poorly attested language and the reconstructed forms are rather unreliable. But here you have it. Feel free to screenshot this slide, give it your full analysis, find those similarities, find those differences, and you're beginning at that point to do your own comparative method. So now let's take a look at an example sentence in Proto-Indo-European. And we will also look at the same sentence in some of the offspring languages. So to begin here, we have our vocabulary, and the vocabulary is listed in the most basic form. So without any case endings or without any verb conjugations. Again, with pronunciation here, please take it with a pinch of salt. But to begin with, we have word for father, which we encountered before, pater. Here we have the word for wool, chulchanech. The word for mother, mechter, and dedechti, meaning gives. Please note, as we saw earlier, there is a second word for father, which is atta. Atta is probably a lull word, which means that it's a word derived from the sounds that a baby makes. So Proto-Indo-European would have had these two forms. This is just important to note because we will see this in action in a few moments. So if we put all that into a sentence, this is what we come up with. And I would like to draw your attention to the case endings here. Here we have the accusative case ending because wool is the direct object of our verb gives. Here we have the dative case ending because mother is the indirect object and father remains in the form that we saw previously in the nominative case. Word order is flexible in Proto-Indo-European, but I have decided to put the verb in the final position as consensus seems to be that this would be the default position for the verb. I will link in the comment section or the video description the online sources and the online forums that I use just to sanity check my Proto-Indo-European grammar and the grammar of the proto-languages, which we'll look at in just one moment. And here we have the same Proto-Indo-European sentence, but we have three of the offspring languages. This is Hittite, this is Proto-Balto-Slavic, and this is Proto-Celtic. Obviously, this sentence could be reconstructed for any of the offspring proto-languages, for Proto-Germanic or Proto-Hellenic or whatever, but I've just chosen these three as they give us a nice example of the sort of variants that we can expect. So what can we observe here? Well, firstly, let me just add a few markings here to the Hittite. There we go. We have Atash, Hulanan, Ani, Pi. So we can see some similarities with the Proto-Indo-European version that we have above here. Atash, of course, does not derive from Pechter, but from a Lulwert word for father. Hulanan, we can see, is derived from the Proto-Indo-European word for wool. With only a minor change in articulation here, we've lost this second laryngeal and the final consonant has changed. Ani means mother, of course, isn't derived from mechtre. And pi, the Hittite verb for to give, is actually derived not from this Proto-Indo-European form, but from a preverb form. And this preverb form is also attested in Tocharian and Greek. And we also have the same word order. Moving on to Proto-Balto-Slavic. Again, we can see that this was adopted as the word for father. Wil, nan, matere, dosti. So again, in the Proto-Balto-Slavic, we have the glottalization twice. In the Proto-Balto-Slavic form, we also have the glottalization here. This we can see is perhaps linked to the laryngeals in Proto-Indo-European. And dosti is clearly derived from dedechti. Proto-Celtic, fatir, ulanam, matre, dati. This is perhaps the closest form to the original Proto-Indo-European. We've lost the laryngeals, yet the case endings are highly comparable, and we have the vowel change in the verb form, again caused by this loss of the laryngeal. So again, we can see many similarities in these three branches with the original Proto-Indo-European, but we can also see some key differences. Again, I just want to stress that this is part of that journey in the evolution of those offspring languages, where progressively over time things diverge into basically what we have today, right? Where maybe on paper at first glance, languages like Farsi, Polish and Welsh perhaps don't seem to be too related, but with careful analysis and comparison, we in fact see that they all stem from the same proto-language, Proto-Indo-European. And so finally today, I would like to show you a few books that I've used to study some of the offspring languages of Proto-Indo-European. But just to give you a general overview of the Proto-Indo-Europeans and the Proto-Indo-European language, I recommend this book, The Horse, the Wheel and Language by David W. Anthony. This was my first go-to book to learn something about the Proto-Indo-Europeans. I still refer to it even now. It has great material inside it. I really recommend it. It's a must-have for anybody who's interested in Proto-Indo-European studies. If you'd like to learn Hittite, I use this all of the time on my channel, The Elements of Hittite by Theo van den Hout. As you can see, it's well weathered, lots of annotations, lots of notations. I take this on holiday with me. I study, review Hittite everywhere. This is just the book to do it. It's modern in style, it's not boring, and Hittite is a surprisingly easy language to pick up, so I recommend this book. I love the Teach Yourself series, so if you're interested in Farsi or Persian, it's a modern language. The Teach Yourself series is very good. This is complete Persian. I've used this to review my Persian. I learned it a few years back when I was working in Turkmenistan. Latin, this is intended to be delivered in a teacher to student setting, so it's not intended to be studied as a self-study resource, but you can. I did, and it's modern. It's got pictures in, which helps you during those long, arduous study sessions. Everything's well laid out. It's really well designed. If I was studying Latin at school, at university, at college, I would love to have that book. Another book which is incredibly well designed, but very useful for the self-studying student. If you're interested in Old Irish, so a Celtic language, Sen Coithelc by David Stifter. I've done a review of this on my channel already. It's modern, it's funny, it's informative, it's very thorough. You're going to be quite well versed in Old Irish if you get through this. And yeah, I love it. Hieroglyphic Luvian by Annick Payne. If you're interested in another Anatolian language, it's worth getting just for the aesthetic nature of Luvian hieroglyphics, to be honest. You really perhaps need to have a bit of an understanding of how Anatolian languages function, because none of the grammar is really explained or anything like that in this book. But this book, in combination with the Hittite book, it's fantastic if you're looking to get into reading Luvian texts, and there's some interesting stuff in that. Ancient Greek, another teach yourself book, Complete Ancient Greek. It's perhaps not the best book in the collection of books that I've just shown you. I still recommend it. I found it quite difficult to get through this. It's lacking maybe in a little bit of timing, rhythm, stuff like that. And of course, for a self-student over a long time horizon when you're learning a language, you need something which is going to engage you. It struggles in that regard. However, it is informative. There's a big glossary at the back. You'll definitely know a lot about ancient Greek grammar by the time you've got through with this. Perhaps pick it up in combination with something else, but I can still recommend it. I learned from it, so it works. If I can learn from it, anyone can. Old Norse, the Viking language series. This is kind of like, this is the second edition. This goes through the grammar and the vocabulary. It's modern style, so it's not like one of those old-fashioned grammars which just lists grammatical rules and things like that. Informative pictures, proverbs. It does really well at presenting the grammar. It does it, there's little tidbits of informative stuff in there. I don't want to show too much of the book. Pronunciation. It's difficult to find something negative to say about this book, although I'll be honest, I know some people don't like it. I, however, do. I learned a lot from it. There is a second book in the series. I actually think there's audio with that as well. There's a second book in the series, Viking Language 2. This just looks at texts and gets you to read them, translate them, understand them, analyse them. It's a little bit more heavier to go through. It took me a lot longer to go through this than it did the first book, but I recommend. And it's not an Indo-European language, but if you're interested in ancient languages and stuff like that, and you want to get your head around cuneiform, this is the book for you, Complete Babylonian. So again, it's not an Indo-European language, but it's contemporary or near contemporary to Hittite. I enjoyed this book. I managed to work through it a lot quicker than perhaps the ancient Greek book, and it will give you a head start in things like cuneiform and reading cuneiform. It's not all, it is transliterated into the Latin alphabet. The majority of it is, so you're not working just with cuneiform. But I think it's a great introduction to the time period, to the languages of the region, and stuff like this. I think, when I after I'd done this, I went into Hittite and never looked back with studying Hittite at all. This final book is actually serving as my microphone stand, so be a little bit careful there. Is not in English, unfortunately, but it is the first book I ever read connected to Indo-European languages. It just focuses on Indo-European languages. It's EIGHT Proto-Indo-European by Bednarek, I believe. And, if you're a Polish speaker or, you can understand Polish, I suggest this book. It's a little bit dated now in some areas, but I found it very readable. I found it very informative. And it is this book that subsequently led me to read David Anthony's book and got me into Indo-European languages and languages from antiquity in general. So that's all from me for today. I hope this journey into Indo-European languages has been somewhat informative. It truly was an honour for me to try and speak to you fine people about Indo-European languages. Have a great day. Speak to you soon.